I opened the mail expecting a wedding invitation, but what I got was worse than silence. It was a formal retraction. I had been uninvited from my own niece's wedding. No explanation, no call, just a cold message signed by her mother, my sister. I sat in shock, the paper trembling in my hands, wondering what I'd done to deserve such humiliation. But instead of mourning the rejection, I made a decision. I wouldn't just show up. I'd make sure no one forgot what real family looks like. And when the big day arrived, I walked straight down that aisle, with the bride on my arm. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, which country are you watching this from? And if you believe in karma, family loyalty, and epic comebacks, hit subscribe for more powerful stories every day. I always thought of my niece, Layla, as my own daughter. She was the one who used to run to me with scraped knees, hide behind me when she was in trouble, and curl up beside me on the couch with a blanket for Saturday morning cartoons. Her parents, my sister Samira and her husband, were often too busy with their careers to pay close attention, so I filled the gaps. From helping her with school projects to attending every piano recital, I was the dependable constant in her life. So when her wedding date was finally set, I was more excited than anyone. I helped her choose the venue, sampled cake flavors with her, and even held her hand as she tried on dresses. Every moment felt like a shared dream, something we had been building toward for years. Then, out of nowhere, the calls stopped. Layla became distant. Texts turned from paragraphs into one-word replies. Samira began acting colder during family events. I shrugged it off as wedding stress. It's normal, I thought. People get overwhelmed. But then the letter arrived. A thick cream envelope embossed with gold lettering. At first, I thought it was the official invitation. But inside was a different message entirely. A note stating, in plain language, that due to limited seating and evolving family dynamics, my presence at the wedding would no longer be required. I was uninvited, discarded like a last-minute table centerpiece. No apology, no phone call, just silence and a signature, Samira's, not even from Layla. I sat in my living room staring at that card like it had just punched me in the chest. 100 thoughts flooded my mind. Was this a mistake? Did Layla even know? What had I done? I picked up my phone more than once to call her, but each time I hesitated. If she had allowed this, maybe the relationship I thought we had never existed in the first place. The days that followed were filled with quiet devastation. I avoided social media, knowing that the wedding planning updates would be posted by the hour. Every mention of the ceremony felt like salt on an open wound. I didn't tell anyone, not my coworkers, not my friends. I carried the shame like a secret I had earned. But one day, while going through an old photo album, I found a picture of Layla at age 6, beaming as she held a handmade, best uncle ever card she had made for me. That moment reminded me of the countless times I had shown up when no one else did. I thought about how I taught her to ride a bike, how I took off work to attend her school play when her parents couldn't. I wasn't just some background relative. I was a pillar in her life, and even if she'd forgotten that now, I hadn't. I realized then that my love for her had never been conditional, and that maybe, just maybe, something more was going on beneath the surface. So I started asking questions. I reached out to a few cousins under the guise of casual conversation, trying to gather whatever details I could without sounding desperate. What I learned stunned me. Apparently, Samira had been telling people that I was overbearing, that I was trying to control Layla's wedding. According to her, I was inserting myself too much, making things uncomfortable and crossing boundaries. None of it was true, but it was enough to seed doubt in the family. I also found out that the groom's family, wealthy and a bit pretentious, thought it would be cleaner to keep the guest list limited to people with status and influence. I didn't fit the profile. In their eyes, I was just a mid-level school administrator who showed up too often in Layla's life. I was too ordinary for their vision of perfection. My sadness slowly started turning into something else, resolve. I realized that Layla wasn't the one who had pushed me out. She had been pressured, manipulated, maybe even guilt, tripped into silence, and I wasn't going to let that be the final chapter in our story. If I couldn't be invited with dignity, I would show up with purpose. not to cause drama or make a scene, but to remind Layla, and everyone else, who had really been there all along. 2 weeks before the wedding, I reached out to Uncle Bashir, one of the few relatives who still talked to me regularly. I knew he was helping with the event logistics. I told him plainly that I would be attending the wedding, whether my name was on the guest list or not. At first he was hesitant. He didn't want family drama, but after I told him everything, showed him the uninvitation letter, and reminded him of all the years I spent putting Layla's happiness before my own comfort, he understood. He didn't promise to sneak me in, but he also didn't stop me. The morning of the wedding arrived, and I stood outside the venue dressed in my best suit, holding a simple bouquet knot for the bride, but for the little girl who once said I was her hero. I wasn't angry, I wasn't even nervous. I was steady, focused, clear. I stood far from the crowd, away from the cameras and the chaos, just observing. People passed me without recognition, but I didn't care. I was there for one moment, one person. When the music started and the bridal party lined up, I caught sight of Layla inside the venue entrance. She looked radiant, nervous but beautiful, and then she saw me. Her eyes widened. For a moment she froze. She glanced toward her mother, then back at me. I gave a small nod, just one, and to my shock, she started walking. Past the wedding planner, past the floral archway, straight to me. There were murmurs from the guests. Samira tried to intercept her, but Layla gently brushed her aside. Then she reached out her hand to me and whispered, "Walk me down." And just like that, I took her arm. People gasped, cameras clicked. A few in the front row stood in confusion, but I didn't hear any of it. All I saw was the niece I'd loved like my own, reclaiming her truth. We walked slowly, each step heavy with emotion. And when we reached the altar, she squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you for never leaving." After the wedding walk, everything felt like a blur. We reached the altar and Layla let go of my arm gently, her fingers trembling slightly. Her groom, Omar, looked stunned, as if he had just witnessed something completely unscripted. And he had. Samira's expression, frozen somewhere between horror and disbelief, said everything, but the ceremony proceeded. The music swelled, the officiant smiled awkwardly, and everyone sat back down, some murmuring, others shifting in their seats. I quietly stepped to the side, not wanting to draw more attention. But every pair of eyes in the hall followed me until I disappeared into the back row, alone but steady. I could feel the atmosphere in the room changing. The tightly rehearsed image Samira had tried to control had been broken, and something raw and real had taken its place. The ceremony finished, and applause echoed around the hall. I clapped too, not out of obligation but pride. Layla had found her strength in the moment that mattered most. As guests began to rise and filter into the reception area, I remained in my seat. I didn't know if I was still welcome. My phone buzzed with mixed messages, some from family friends who praised my boldness, others cautiously asking what had happened. I stayed put, watching the line of well-wishers forming around the couple. And then, surprisingly, it was Layla who came to me. She walked straight over, ignoring the photographers and the curious glances. "Uncle," she said softly, "thank you for being there. I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," I admitted, trying to keep my voice calm. "I didn't want to make your day harder." She shook her head. "You made it real. I didn't know what to do after Mom sent that letter. She said it was best for the family image. She told me you'd understand. And you?" I asked gently. "I cried for 2 nights after she made me sign that revised list," Layla said, her eyes glassy. "But I felt trapped. Omar's parents didn't want drama. I was afraid standing up for you would create a scene. But when I saw you today, I realized not having you there would have been the biggest scene of all." That moment broke something open in me. Years of pain, guilt, love, and unspoken support all packed into her words. I nodded, trying to keep it together. "I'm proud of you, Layla. You made your own choice, and I'll never forget that." She hugged me tightly, and for a brief second, everything melted away. The betrayal, the tension, the doubts. It was just her and me again, like old times. Then she looked me squarely in the eyes and said, "Please come to the reception. Sit at the family table. You belong there." I followed her hesitantly to the grand hall, expecting someone Samira or Omar's mother to stop me at the doorway, but no one did. People stared, some whispered, but no one blocked my path. I was seated beside Layla's younger cousin Zoya, who gave me a sly grin and whispered, "Best entrance of the year." I chuckled. It felt strange, being both the uninvited and the honored at once. The evening continued with speeches and toasts. I listened quietly, not expecting to be acknowledged. But after the groom gave his charming, rehearsed thanks, Layla stood up, tapping her glass. Her voice shook at first, but she held the mic with confidence. "There are so many people to thank," she began, "but I want to speak to someone who wasn't even supposed to be here today, because others decided he didn't fit the picture, but without him I wouldn't even know who I am." All heads turned toward me. I froze, unsure of what to do. Layla continued, her voice steadying. "He's the man who showed up to every school recital, who stayed up helping me study for finals, who taught me how to speak up and how to listen. When the world turned quiet or cold, he was the warmth in the room. I was told he didn't belong here, but today I realized he belongs more than anyone else." There was stunned silence, then scattered clapping, then a full applause. I didn't know what to do except stand and nod my head in appreciation. Samira looked like she had swallowed glass. She gave a tight, lipped smile, but her eyes said everything. She hadn't expected her plan to backfire. She had imagined a clean narrative, perfect daughter, prestigious wedding, tidy family dynamic. But real stories don't work that way. Layla had shattered the illusion with one simple truth: loyalty matters more than legacy. After the reception, I stepped outside for some air. The night was cool and the distant hum of traffic filled the background. I thought about slipping away quietly, not wanting to steal any more spotlight. But before I could decide, Samira approached. She stood beside me without speaking for a long moment. Finally, she said, "You really couldn't just stay away, could you?" I turned to her, calm. "I never wanted to be uninvited. You made that decision for both of us." I was trying to avoid conflict, she said, though her tone lacked conviction. Omar's family didn't want a middle-class uncle in the pictures. I asked bluntly. She hesitated, then looked away. "You don't understand the pressure." "No," I said firmly. "You don't understand loyalty. I never cared about the prestige, Samira. I only cared about Layla. She's not a product to be displayed. She's a person. She needed support, not perfection." There was nothing else to say. She nodded slightly, then walked away, her heels echoing against the pavement. I knew things wouldn't magically heal between us. There was too much unsaid, too much damage. But as I turned back toward the hall, I saw Layla inside laughing, surrounded by people who genuinely cared. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found her own voice. That night, when I got home, I found a message from Layla waiting for me. "Thank you for walking beside me. Not just today, but always. I'm sorry for the silence. I promise no one will ever make me forget who you are to me again." I smiled through tears. Some invitations don't need to be printed. Some roles don't need approval. Sometimes the people who are pushed out end up being the ones who walk straight into the heart of the story. The day after the wedding, my phone didn't stop buzzing. The video of me walking Layla down the aisle had gone viral. Someone in the audience had captured the moment, uploaded it, and now it was circulating with captions like "the real father figure" and "uninvited uncle steals the show." I wasn't looking for fame or sympathy, but the public response validated what I already knew deep down: love doesn't need permission. It was strange, though, seeing my personal life turned into hashtags and comments. Strangers debated the drama, speculated about family tensions, and praised or criticized Samira's actions. Through all the noise, one voice grounded me: Layla's. She messaged me constantly that day, updating me about their short honeymoon plans, sending selfies, and most importantly, telling me how proud she was to have stood her ground. But not everyone felt the same. That evening, I received a sharply worded email from Omar's father. He expressed how unfortunate it was that the wedding had been overshadowed by a familial spectacle. He didn't mention me by name, but the message was clear: I wasn't welcome. I deleted the email without responding. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. Let them believe what they wanted. I had nothing to prove. Samira, however, wasn't ready to let it go. She called the next morning, and I let it go to voicemail, but her second message caught my attention. "I want to meet," she said. "Just us to talk, not about blame, about everything." Her voice sounded tired, unlike the sharp confidence I was used to. I debated it for hours, pacing my apartment, sipping bitter coffee. Eventually, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe near the park we used to take Layla to when she was small. Samira looked older than I remembered. Her makeup was perfect, but there was something in her eyes. Guilt maybe, or just weariness. She sipped her tea and stared at the table. "You humiliated me," she said finally. "I didn't mean to," I replied. "I showed up for Layla, that's all. You know how hard I worked for that day to be perfect," she said, still not meeting my gaze. I was under pressure. Omar's parents had expectations. There were sponsors involved, media. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a brand. And that brand didn't have room for me. I asked, unable to hide the edge in my voice. She flinched. "You don't understand. You've always been the nice one, the one Layla runs to when she needs comfort. I was the strict parent, the planner, the one who had to hold it all together, and in that one moment you became the hero." I leaned back, absorbing her words. It wasn't anger she was feeling. It was resentment built over years of comparison, of feeling like she had to be the bad cop while I got to be the fun uncle. But that wasn't my fault. I never asked for that role. I said gently, "But when you pushed me out, you made it bigger than it had to be. I never tried to compete with you, Samira. I just loved her." Her eyes finally met mine. They were wet. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that if she chose you over me, it meant I failed." I sighed. "Parenting isn't a contest. It's not about who gets the mic. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, even when you're not invited." She nodded slowly, and for the first time in years there was a fragile bridge forming between us. We didn't resolve everything that day, but we started something important: honesty. She apologized, not just for the wedding, but for the years of coldness, of acting like my role didn't matter. I accepted, not because it erased the past, but because Layla deserved a family that could stand in the same room without breaking apart. Later that week, Layla invited me over for dinner. Just her, Omar, and me. It was awkward at first, but Omar, surprisingly, was warm. "You've raised an amazing woman," he told me, shaking my hand firmly. "Thank you for showing up when it mattered." We ate, we laughed, we shared old stories. And when I left, I didn't feel like the outsider anymore. I felt like part of something real. That night, as I walked home under the city lights, I realized something simple and profound. Sometimes you don't get invited to the role you're meant to play. Sometimes you have to step forward anyway, and sometimes that's when the real story begins. The days following that dinner with Layla and Omar settled into something warm and unfamiliar: peace. For years, I had grown used to tension threading through every family interaction, a subtle pressure that made me feel like a guest in a life I had helped build. But now, something had shifted. Layla's messages were brighter. Omar kept checking in on me like a son-in-law who actually wanted to build a bond, and even Samira's tone in texts had changed. It was cautious, sure, but no longer laced with blame. She was trying, and that mattered, yet not everyone embraced this new harmony. The ripple effects of my walk down the aisle had disturbed more than just wedding optics. It had unsettled expectations, especially among those who had always benefited from quiet compliance. And one of those people was Omar's mother, Farah. Farah had always been composed, regal even. Her designer outfits, her carefully worded pleasantries, her disdain for chaos masquerading as etiquette. But behind those pearls and smiles was a woman who had decided early on that her son would marry into a family that added value, and not drama. From day one, I had sensed she viewed our family, especially me, as a liability. I didn't come with political connections or business alliances. I was just the uncle who teaches literature and quotes dead poets. Farah tolerated me like one tolerates background noise, until I stepped forward at that wedding and turned down the volume on everyone else. The moment that video went viral, I became an unignorable element, and Farah, she didn't like what she couldn't control. The week after the wedding, she invited Layla to brunch alone, which raised enough of a red flag for Layla to call me afterward, voice tight with disbelief. She asked if you could maybe step back, Layla said. She said things are tense now and the spotlight should be on the newlyweds, not you. I could hear the hurt in her voice, hurt for me, for how unfair that was. She said I should ask you not to come to the reception they're planning for his business associates. I chuckled bitterly. Let me guess. Because it's supposed to be professional, right? Layla didn't answer. She didn't need to. We both knew this was just polite packaging around a toxic gift. Layla, I said softly, you don't need to fight this for me, but you also don't need to accept it. I'm fine not going. I don't want to go without you, she said. Then don't, I replied, or go and stand tall. You don't need to prove anything. But deep down, I knew this wouldn't be the end. When power feels threatened, it pushes back harder. Sure enough, a few days later, a blogger reached out to me through Instagram. Someone who ran a popular wedding gossip account. You're the man from that wedding video, right? They wrote, we're doing a piece on family dynamics gone right and would love to feature your story. My instinct was to decline. I didn't want to drag Layla's name through the digital mud. But after a short call with her, Layla surprised me again. Say yes, she insisted, tell them everything. People need to know what real love looks like. And so I did. I spoke about raising Layla like my own, about the years of quiet sacrifice, and yes, about being uninvited and walking her down the aisle anyway. I didn't attack anyone, didn't name names, I just told the truth. And it exploded. Within 2 days, the article racked up tens of thousands of shares. People left comments calling me Dad of the Year, the man every child deserves, and the uncle who redefined family. And with that attention came even more, a talk show segment, a podcast invite, even a small book publisher asking if I'd ever consider writing about unconventional fatherhood. It was surreal. I'd spent years in the background, and now the world wanted to hear my voice. And I intended to use it, but not for fame, for change. The public support put Farah and others in a tight spot. Suddenly, criticizing me didn't look like protecting tradition. It looked petty. Samira, to her credit, called me in tears the night after the article aired. I read it, she said. I didn't know half those things. I didn't realize how much you carried. You didn't want to know. I replied, not bitterly, just honestly. You were focused on control, not connection. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm trying now, and for the first time I believed her. Then came the biggest shift of all. Omar, who had quietly watched all this unfold, invited me out for coffee alone. We sat in a quiet booth at the same cafe where Samira and I had confronted the past. I want to do something, he said. Layla and I are starting a foundation. A foundation, I repeated, surprised. Yeah, for mentorship, for kids without stable parental figures. We want you to help run it. I blinked, stunned. Why me? Omar smiled. Because you showed up when no one else did, and because I've seen what that meant to her. That night, as I walked home with the official proposal letter in my pocket, I thought about legacy. Not money, not titles, but what we leave behind in the hearts we shape. I had spent so many years believing my contributions were invisible because they weren't praised in speeches or printed on invitations. But now I understood something deeper. Real love doesn't need a spotlight. It creates its own, and when it shines, really shines, no one can uninvite it. So when the reception finally happened, I didn't go as an outcast. I went as someone honored on the opening slide of the presentation for the foundation launch. My picture, standing with Layla on her wedding day, beamed from the projector screen. Below it, the words, "Every child deserves someone who shows up. This is ours." And when I stepped on stage to say a few words, not as a placeholder, not as a background figure, but as the co-founder of something that mattered, I felt no resentment, just peace, because they may have uninvited me from the wedding. But I walked my truth anyway, and that walk led me exactly where I was meant to be. The days after the reception felt like a sunrise after a long storm. It wasn't that everything was perfect, but the air around me had changed. Lighter, calmer, grounded in a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. I woke up the next morning to dozens of messages, not from strangers this time, but from people I hadn't heard from in a long while. Former students, old friends, even distant relatives who'd seen the foundation launch on social media or heard about the speech I gave. One message that struck me most came from an old student named Zoya, who had once struggled through my class after losing her father. She wrote, "You probably don't remember, but you once stayed after class just to ask if I was okay. That was the first time in months someone noticed me. Now I'm a therapist helping girls just like I was. Thank you for showing up, sir." Her message stayed with me. Not because it flattered me, but because it reminded me why I chose a life of presence over prestige. The world rarely rewards quiet compassion in the moment, but over time, those seeds bloom where no one's watching. Layla and Omar officially launched the foundation 2 weeks later. We named it the Constant Branch, inspired by the idea that in life's storms, children need someone to be their steady anchor. I had my own quiet office in the converted brownstone we leased for the organization. It had warm yellow walls, sunlight pouring through lace, curtained windows, and shelves of books, stories about resilience, identity, and belonging. We started with mentorship programs for kids in the foster system and those being raised by extended family. Every Thursday afternoon, I ran storytelling circles with teenagers. I never called it therapy, though that's what it quietly became. One boy, Curran, came every week and never said a word. He'd sit in the back, arms crossed, face stone still. But one day, after a session about who taught you what love means, he stayed behind. He said quietly, not looking at me, "My uncle said I should stop acting like my mom matters 'cause she left, but I still think of her every night." I nodded and said, "Sometimes love leaves but the feeling stays, and that means it's still real." Curran didn't respond, just gave me a small nod and walked out. That was the first time he looked lighter. That was the kind of work we were doing now. Not flashy, not headline, grabbing, but sacred. I started writing again too. At Omar's insistence, I began drafting a manuscript, part memoir, part reflection. The working title, Uninvited Doesn't Mean Unloved. Every evening, I'd sit at my desk, typing out the journey I never thought would be read by anyone, not just the wedding moment, but the years of quiet effort that built to it. The missed birthdays I still showed up with cake for, the homework nights, the whispered reassurances, the silence I carried when I wasn't welcomed but kept showing up anyway. Meanwhile, Samira and I weren't best friends, but we had developed something better, understanding. She visited the Constant Branch once, unannounced, and stood quietly in the back of a reading session. When the kids filed out, she walked up to me. "You created something beautiful," she said sincerely. "And you helped raise someone stronger than I ever imagined." We talked for a while, not about the past but about the future. She wanted to support the foundation in her own way. And slowly, Samira started repairing her relationship with Layla, not by demanding respect, but by earning it back, one sincere gesture at a time. As for Farah, Omar's mother, she didn't change overnight. People like her rarely do. But she, too, couldn't ignore the tide shifting around her. When news of the foundation began spreading, and when Layla made it clear that our work would be a part of their future family identity, Farah had a choice: resist and alienate, or adapt. At a dinner she hosted months later, she surprised everyone, including herself, by publicly acknowledging my role. "Some families are built by blood," she said, "others by heart. We're lucky to have both." It wasn't a full apology, but it was enough for me to see that growth was possible, even in the unlikeliest places. One afternoon, as autumn painted the city in copper and gold, Layla came to my office. She sat on the edge of my desk, the same way she used to as a child. "I'm pregnant," she said, eyes gleaming. My heart paused, then leaped. "You're going to be a mother?" I whispered, overwhelmed. She nodded, then added with a smirk, "And you're going to be a grandfather?" I laughed hard, the kind of laugh that comes from joy stitched with every past pain. I held her hand and said, "That child will never know what it means to be unwanted." From that day, everything became more vivid. I started planning storybooks for the baby. I knitted together a lullaby playlist. I even began building a wooden rocking chair. Slowly, clumsily, but with care. That child would grow up surrounded by voices that saw them, that believed in them from the first moment. The foundation expanded too. We brought in counselors, case managers, retired teachers. We got our first government grant, and then a feature in a national parenting magazine. But through it all, I stayed grounded in the original mission: show up. Stay constant, love loudly even in silence. One particular evening, just before closing the office, I found a letter slipped under my door. No name, no signature, just a handwritten note. It read, "I saw your story. My dad left when I was 6. My stepped. Had never let me forget I wasn't his. I thought love had to be earned by being perfect, but now I'm starting to believe maybe love can be given anyway. Thank you." I sat with that letter for a long time, not crying, just present, letting the weight of it land gently. That anonymous writer might never walk through our doors, might never be seen, but their healing had started, and maybe that was enough. So as the first anniversary of Layla's wedding approached, she asked if we could host the celebration at the foundation. "It feels like where the story really began," she said, so we planned a small gathering. No stage, no sponsors, just stories, family, and one big cake. When she gave her toast that night, Layla stood in front of the crowd, baby bump showing proudly, and said, "They told me once that weddings are where new families begin. But mine started long before the aisle. Mine started with a man who showed up to school plays, held me after nightmares, tucked me. That love doesn't shout. It whispers, I am who I am because of him. And if our child has even half of what I had growing up, they'll be the luckiest in the world." I stood quietly in the back, heart full. Uninvited once, but now, unmistakably home. In the months that followed the anniversary gathering at the Constant Branch, life took on a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. Layla's pregnancy progressed gracefully, her glow unmistakable, and her confidence growing with every doctor's visit. Every ultrasound image she proudly taped to the fridge in her and Omar's cozy apartment. I visited often, not just as a guest, but as a fixture in their lives. Some evenings we cooked together, laughing over my poorly chopped vegetables or the way I kept forgetting how to use their fancy espresso machine. But mostly, we talked about parenting, about fears, about hopes. It was strange, beautiful even, how Layla, once the little girl nervously clinging to my sleeve, was now teaching me things too: how to listen without fixing, how to hold space without needing control, how to simply be a witness to someone else's journey without making it about my own. At the foundation, our programs expanded beyond our initial vision. The Thursday storytelling circles became a sanctuary for kids and teens who'd never been given the space to process what it meant to grow up different, discarded, or displaced. We introduced art therapy, music sessions, and life coaching for single guardians. A woman named Priya came to us seeking help raising her 2 nephews after their mother, her sister, had died suddenly in a car crash. She cried during our intake session, confessing she had no idea how to be both aunt and parent. But over time, through support and shared stories, she found her voice. "I used to think I had to become their mother," she said one day. "Now I know I just have to be someone who won't leave." That, to me, had always been the secret: presence over perfection. Around that same time, I began receiving inquiries from journalists, bloggers, even book agents. The viral video of me walking Layla down the aisle had sparked a broader conversation about chosen family and the quiet, often invisible roles people play in the lives of others. A journalist from a parenting site asked to do a profile on me, and after some hesitation I agreed. The interview went well, though I made it clear I wasn't interested in being a symbol or a saint. "I'm just someone who didn't walk away," I told her. That's all. The article titled "The Man Who Showed Up" gained unexpected traction, and with it came messages from people across the globe parents, teachers, mentors, even neighbors, who had been someone's someone and never gotten recognition. Their stories poured in, full of quiet resilience and complicated love. It reminded me again, not all heroes wear cape. Some just stay year after year, and then Layla went into labor. It was late at night when I got the call. Omar's voice was anxious but excited. "She's asking for you," he said. "We're on our way to the hospital." I threw on a sweater, grabbed the emergency bag we'd prepared together weeks ago, and rushed out into the cool night. The hospital was a blur of elevators, hallway lights, and nurses with practiced smiles. When I reached the maternity ward, Layla was already deep into labor, her face flushed but determined. She gripped my hand without hesitation, just like she used to when facing childhood vaccinations or stage fright before a recital. "You're here," she whispered through clenched teeth. "Always," I replied. Hours passed. The pain ebbed and surged like waves crashing against her will. Omar stayed by her side too, holding her other hand, whispering encouragement, brushing sweat from her forehead. At one point, the nurse commented on how calm I was. I smiled and said, "I've had practice," but inside I was shaking, with love, with fear, with awe. And then, just as dawn crept in, the cry of new life pierced the air, a daughter, small, pink, perfect. Layla sobbed, Omar wept, and I didn't cry. I just stood there, feeling the universe fold into a single moment of purpose. They named her Alara. Later, when things settled and nurses came and went, Layla held Alara in her arms and looked up at me. "I want you to be the first to hold her," she said softly. My hands trembled as I took the tiny bundle, warm and squirming, into my arms. Alara blinked slowly, as if sizing me up. I whispered, "Welcome, little one. You're already so loved." In that moment, I felt decades of pain dissolve. Every rejection, every uninvited moment, every silent ache, it all led here, and it was worth it. In the weeks that followed, I visited almost every day. Alara responded quickly to my voice, often turning her head toward me even before I spoke. I read to her nursery rhymes, lullabies, even silly poems I made up on the spot. I told her stories about her mother as a child, about her strength, her courage, her quiet kindness. And every time she smiled, even just a flicker, it felt like a promise that the cycle of being unseen would stop with her. Meanwhile, back at the foundation, the team had grown. Omar took on a part-time role handling outreach, and we hired 2 social workers to manage the increased caseload. One day, we held an open house where kids painted murals on the walls and volunteers shared food from their cultures. A teenager named Jaspreet stood up and performed a spoken word poem titled My Other Mother. It was about her aunt who raised her after her own mother left. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "You gave me the courage to write this," she told me afterward, "because you proved that love doesn't need permission slips." And that became our new motto, "Love doesn't need permission." We printed it on mugs, bookmarks, tote bags. It wasn't a slogan, it was a philosophy, one that continued to attract support, donations, volunteers, and, most importantly, stories. Real, raw, redemptive stories from people who had loved in the margins and stayed anyway. My relationship with Samira also softened further. She visited Alara often, learning to grandparent without overstepping, to be present without control. We had lunch every other Sunday, sometimes awkward, sometimes warm. We didn't erase our history, but we stopped weaponizing it. We were both wrong, she said once, over chai, but we both did right when it mattered. That I could live with. On Alara's 6th-month birthday, Layla hosted a small family picnic in the park. There was music, balloons, even a magician. At one point, as I sat on a blanket holding Alara, watching her tiny fingers curl around mine, Samira sat beside me. "She loves you," she said, just like her mother did. I nodded, tears finally rising. And I'll never take that for granted. That evening, as I walked home, I thought back to that moment so long ago, standing outside the wedding venue, uninvited, uncertain. And I realized that wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything that mattered. Sometimes life tries to write you out of the story, but love, real love, finds its way back in. And if you keep showing up, even when the door is closed, eventually, someone opens it for you, or you find the courage to walk in anyway. And when you do, everything changes. Not in grand, cinematic ways, but in the quiet moments. A baby's laugh, a hand held in a hospital room. A child looking at you and calling you by the name you never thought you'd earn. Papa. Looking back now, I realize that what seemed like the most humiliating rejection of my life, the moment I was uninvited from the wedding of the girl I helped raise, was actually the catalyst for everything beautiful that followed. Life has a strange way of testing you, of asking whether you're willing to show up when you're not wanted, to speak when you haven't been handed the mic, and to love without permission or validation. And if you answer yes, not just once, but over and over again, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop waiting for others to define your place in their stories and start writing your own. I didn't walk Layla down the aisle to make a point. I did it because it was right. I didn't confront Samira because I wanted an apology. I did it because silence had cost us both too much. I didn't show up to Alura's birth hoping to be seen as a father. I showed up because love doesn't need a label to be real. What I've learned is this: the most powerful roles we play in people's lives are often the ones no one asks us to play. They're the roles we claim through consistency, through care, through a presence that doesn't demand recognition, but earns it anyway. Alura will grow up surrounded by people who adore her, and I have faith that she'll never know what it means to feel left out or less than. Layla has built a home where empathy isn't a weakness but a strength, and even Samira, for all her flaws and past mistakes, has learned to soften, to unlearn, to grow. Our family may not look like a Hallmark card, but it's real, and it's healing. The foundation continues to thrive. We've opened a second branch in a neighboring city. More families are coming through our doors. More children are learning that just because someone walks away doesn't mean they're unlovable. And more adults are finding the courage to stay. We don't erase their pain, we honor it. And in doing so, we make space for something more enduring: hope. I still get messages about the wedding video. People recognize me in cafes now and say, "You're the guy from the aisle walk." I always smile politely, say thank you, and move on. Not because I'm ungrateful, but because that moment was never about going viral. It was about finally, unapologetically, stepping into a role I had already earned over years of bedtime stories, scraped knees, awkward teenage talks, and graduation tears. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. I've held grudges, spoken too soon, stayed too quiet. But if there's one thing I've done right, it's that I never walked away. And for Layla, for Alura, for the kids who come through our foundation and look up with eyes full of questions, I'll keep showing up. No invitation needed, because in the end, real family isn't defined by who gives you a seat at the table. It's defined by who shows up when no one else will. And that's the kind of legacy I want to leave behind.